I'm not going to be able to perform as effectively as I did unless I rest and let those glycogen stores recuperate before I do another hard session. Kia ora guys, and welcome back to another Tips with Tipu training video. Today's question is, how do you incorporate recovery into your training programs? Do you have recovery days? And how often should you be sprinting or training intensely? This is a very good question because obviously in paddling, in outrigger canoe, we want to get faster. And when we race, most of the time we're racing at pretty high intensities. However, that doesn't mean that all of our training needs to be high intensity. Basically, we want a combination of easy aerobic training and higher intensity interval training, whether that's anaerobic or high aerobic training. And for me, a really simple way is to divide your hard training days with easy training days. That's as simple as it gets. Now, I want to go over some basic information that will help you figure out what to do on your hard days and what to do on your easy days, and how long you should be resting, because there's different types of fatigue. Now, one of the easiest ways of monitoring fatigue, or one of the biggest contributors to fatigue, that I would say, is basically glycogen depletion. Now, glycogen is the stored sugar in the muscle, and you have around about 60 to 90 minutes of intense exercise before you run out of that glycogen. If you're on a low carb diet, low sugar diet all the time, you're probably going to be pretty well depleted anyway before you even exercise. That's why low carb diets aren't always the best for high intensity exercise. Maybe if you're not training a lot, you're not a very active person in your general lifestyle, a low carb diet might suit. But if you're an elite athlete trying to, especially in sprints, trying to be the best you can be, you need some form of carbohydrate, glycogen in the muscle in order to work anaerobically, because the anaerobic system uses glycogen, sugar or carbohydrate to derive ATP for energy. Without carbohydrate in the muscle, in the bloodstream, we can't really produce those high intensities. So 60 to 90 minutes roughly of glycogen that we have in the muscle. So let's say we go out and we work hard for an hour, we do intervals, or we do a threshold for 60 minutes. We're going to likely get pretty low glycogen levels, and it takes anywhere between 12 to 24, even upwards of 48 hours or even 72 hours, depends on the intensity and the duration of that hard workout. It's going to take upwards of 48 to even 72 hours to fully replenish those glycogen stores. So based on that information alone, you want to separate your hard workouts by at least 24 to 48 hours, sometimes even 72 hours, based on the fact that I'm not going to be able to perform as effectively as I did unless I rest and let those carbohydrates, those glycogen stores recuperate before I do another hard session. So that's one way to look at it. And this is a very endurance athletes run into this problem a lot, is like, because they're doing so much mileage, they're running into energy deficit problems, not being able to sustain energy levels because they're constantly low on glycogen because they're not really, because you're doing so much mileage, it's hard to catch up. So that's one way to look at it. Separating it by 48 to 72 hours, your hard workouts, and then putting easy days where you're low intensity in between. So as a rough rule of thumb, 2 to 3 hard intense training sessions a week are sufficient with recovery days in between. Now the other way to look at it, and this is more associated with a sprint athlete who doesn't necessarily always go for long duration. Sometimes it's really short sessions, 30 minutes, 45 minutes or 60-minute sessions, but a lot of rest time, but short bursts of intervals. And this is really taxing the anaerobic system. Obviously the anaerobic system does use carbohydrate as well, and potentially a lot of it, but sometimes your workouts don't push you to glycogen depletion, especially let's say you're doing starts, for example, where you're getting free ATP PC energy, and you're not really tapping into a lot of ATP derived from sugar. Well, you are, but not the same as if you're doing a full-on threshold session for 60 to 90 minutes, or even a 20k paddle. Even though sometimes it's low intensity, you're still going to burn through a lot of carbohydrates. So the fatigue that you want to monitor when you're a sprint athlete, when you're training for sprints, is not necessarily glycogen depletion. And this is the more complex form of fatigue. The more complex form of fatigue is neuromuscular fatigue. And this is harder to identify compared to glycogen depletion. Glycogen depletion is just, I have pretty low energy. You're hungry. You might be signs of wanting to eat, and you just have low energy. The muscles just have no energy to perform. Neuromuscular fatigue, you don't always feel that way because it's in your neuromuscular system, your nerves, your firing rate of the signals to the muscles to fire. Those type of things are harder to identify, and those things are more often associated with overreaching or overtraining. And then usually when you do overtrain the neuromuscular system, this can lead to injuries. Of course, glycogen depletion can lead to injury, overuse injuries, tendonitis, things, but it's the neuromuscular fatigue that can really impact your different types of fatigue, falling into states of overreaching and fatigue. So that's why, even though in some high intensity sprinting scenarios, you still want to take at least 48 hours to recover from those intense exercise, to allow the neuromuscular system to adapt and recover from those high intensity trainings. Otherwise, you over time, lots of high intensity sprints and even anaerobic training can lead to a reduction in performance. Another way to look at it is actually anaerobic training. So anaerobic training, because you're accumulating a lot of lactic acid in the blood, in the muscles during those sessions, that lactic acid or the hydrogen ions that accumulate in the muscle can be detrimental to the muscle itself. So if you're doing too much anaerobic training, it can actually start being bad for the muscle. So let's say you do a high intensity sprint session, anaerobic session one day, and then the next day you focus on more of an aerobic session that allows your muscles to flush out all the bad products and allow for recovery. So one good way, obviously the easiest way to understand fatigue and monitor fatigue is just to understand yourself. You definitely want to push yourself, push your limits so that you actually become more aware. I've gone through stages of pushing myself to my very limits, but it's been good for me because it allows me to understand what those limits are and I can adjust accordingly. A good way to monitor fatigue is also using heart rate monitor. Heart rate's really, heart rate is a tough thing to use, because it can vary so often during training sessions. But obviously, a simple method will be taking your resting heart rate in the morning, and you want to try and monitor your resting heart rate. And if your resting heart rate increases and it stays elevated like every morning for more than 3 days or something, then you may want to dial back and have a recovery day. So resting heart rate is a good point of monitoring fatigue. And playing with nutrient intake, obviously carbohydrate intake. If you're on a really strenuous training schedule, trying to fit in upwards of 12 sessions a week, then you want to make sure that you're getting adequate energy in, and the right type of energy. We'll talk about that maybe in another video. We'll break down macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, what types of foods to eat around performance. But I hope this gives you a rough idea. If anyone asked me, I would say no more than 2 to 3 hard, intense training sessions during the week, and the rest aerobic. You can split those 2 to 3 into shorter sessions. So maybe you can do 4 to 5 sprint sessions, but they're shorter. Like maybe they're 30 minutes in the morning and then 30 minutes in the afternoon, something like that. So hope this video helps, gives you a little insight into fatigue and recovery, some things to think about. Please like the video, share the video, and post a question in the comment section if you want a specific question answered in the next one. Thank you guys for watching, and happy training like a king. If you want a t-shirt, I'll leave the link in the bio too. Kia ora.